I posted this question, who are the real children of Israel? And of course, I received all kinds of responses. People replied using Bible verses that had nothing to do with answering the question. And people replied with packaged fake Jews stuff. At this point in time, we are completely aware of who the real children of Israel are. But no one dealt with the other question, who are the occupiers in the land today? In this video, I will show how the occupiers that live in the politically created state of Israel are. Please take the time to drink in this information because Messiah said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." I posted this video some time ago on my YouTube channel and on my Facebook, and both media venues removed the video. YouTube gave me a strike against my channel. Let's see what happens this time. Shalom.
Ashkenaz is first mentioned in the book of Genesis, chapter 10. Genesis chapter 10 is known as the Table of Nations. And this is the genealogy of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And sons were born to them after the flood. The sons of Japheth, Gomer, and Magog, and Madai, and Yawan, and Tubal, and Meshech, and Tyrus. And the sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz, and Riphath, and Togarmah. And the sons of Yawan, Elishah, and Tarshish, Kittim, and Dadanim. From these the coastland peoples of the nations were separated into their lands, everyone according to his language, according to their clans, into their nations. Bereshit chapter 10 verses 1 through 5. Genesis.
The scientists wrote, the majority of Ashkenazi Jews are descended from prehistoric European women. While the Jewish religion began in the Near East and the Ashkenazi Jews were believed to have origins in the early indigenous tribes of this region, new evidence from mitochondria DNA, which is passed on exclusively from mother to child, suggests that female ancestors of most modern Ashkenazi Jews converted to Judaism in the North Mediterranean around 2,000 years ago and later in West and Central Europe. Stephen S. Jacobs, European Jew, has chosen to inform the general public about an ancient Hebrew heritage which exists for many West African ethnic groups. He says on page 14 and 15, we in America tend to associate the word Jew and Hebrew with white people because of our European cultural conditioning. A trip to the state of Israel would dispel this notion immediately. There you will find Jews of all colors and ethnic backgrounds living side by side. And historically, we can read in our own history books on African history that black Africans, for example, the Phalasha of Ethiopia, were Jews long before Christianity or Islam made an appearance on the scene. The white man, as is logical of human nature, has written and interpreted history largely from his own point of view. Mr. Jacobs also wrote, The bias in our knowledge of history runs deep. It is reflected, for example, by the fact that little space is devoted to the historic and theological kinship between Christianity and the so-called pagan Greco-Roman religions of 2,000 years ago. It also is reflected by the fact that relatively few books deal with the non-Hebraic ancestry of most white Jews who are descendants of Greeks, Romans, Armenians, Berbers, and others who adopted or converted to Judaism during the period of its greatest expansion in the Mediterranean era before the Christian era began. Certainly, few white historians are able to plumb the depths of anguish and despair suffered by black Africans who, like cattle, once were herded to the Western Hemisphere as slaves.
Gentlemen, right now we would like to show you Jewish dance. We used to have many Jewish people living in the south of Russia. We used to have many Jewish people living in the south of Russia. The south of Russia. The south of Russia. It also is reflected by the fact that relatively few books deal with the non-Hebraic ancestry of most white Jews who are descendants of Greeks, Romans, Armenians, Berbers, and others who adopted or converted to Judaism during the period of its greatest expansion in the Mediterranean era before the Christian era began.
And I'd like to now bring up another interesting place that you're finding descendants of the Israelites, but may not necessarily be from the 10 tribes, but will also play a role. And it shouldn't be overlooked. It's a very serious scenario. Is in Africa. Africa has perhaps hundreds of millions of people with this identity right now of being from the people of Israel. Does that mean they were from the 10 tribes? Likely not. We were taught by the historians and within our own traditions that when the Romans conquered Judea, a few hundred years after that the tribes of Israel went into exile, perhaps millions of Judeans were sold into slavery, into Africa, into Rome, deep into Africa. And if you look now, you're seeing people who are most likely the descendants of those slaves who kept true. I'd like to bring up a few specific examples because they're going to be game changers. professor from Duke University went out there and did DNA testing on them. And he showed not only do they share Semitic genes from people who were in Yemen and back to the Middle East, these gentlemen, a large percent of them, have the Y chromosome to be Kohanim, to be priests. Now, if anyone who doesn't know, a priest is a specific family clan of the nation of Israel who come from Aaron, the brother of Moses, who was the first priest. And anyone descended from Aaron has the status title priest. And we found that these men in this village in South Africa called Lemba, L-E-M-B-A, carry this genetic marker to let us know that they share the same as from the Sephardic and the Ashkenaz and the population of the people in Israel today. They share the same exact DNA marker. That's mind-blowing. So everyone kind of got humbled a little bit who laughed at them and said, now what? Now what do we do about this? This could have tremendous implications. Something big happening is in Nigeria. You have the Igbo people, or Igbo, pronounced either way. There's 40 million of them, also Christians, like I spoke about before, how that could happen to the children of Israel very easily. But also a lot of them are now coming out and converting back or adopting the rules of the Torah without all the paganism that they've been practicing for hundreds of years. There's been books written about it from scholars in Nigeria, from scholars from the Jewish people. And where it gets interesting is, in America, there was a slave trade. And a lot of the slaves, a very high percentage of them, came from Western Nigerian ports. And in America today, you see a very large movement of African Americans who say that they're the real chosen people, that they're the children of Israel, they're the Judeans. Maybe that they were the original Israelites, and maybe that the Jewish people today who are white, Caucasian people came in a little bit later on. We know that some of the greatest sages of the transmission of the Torah were converts from Rome. You have a man named Onkelos who wrote a commentary on the Torah, unprecedented, that we still learn today. He was the largest pillars on the transmission today were Roman converts. So here we are, we're Caucasian Jewish people, and now you have people in Africa saying that they're the real people of Israel. It can't be ruled out at all. We know they were sold into slavery. We know now that they're fulfilling prophecies by saying, we're coming back. We want to...
The U.S. State Department, in its 3-volume report on the origins of communism in Russia, published in 1931, reveals how Jewish-controlled German banks under the leadership of Max Warburg conspired as early as 1914 to send large payments to Lenin, Trotsky, and others in their attempts to bring down the Tsar. When the White Russian patriots heroically attempted to regain their freedom from the Jews, the Judaica says compact Jewish masses were utilized by the Bolsheviks to suppress such counter-revolution. Clearly, Jews and native Russians were engaged in a death struggle over the destiny of Russia. Unfortunately, the Jewish masses won. The Jewish masses won. The Jewish masses won.
We will survive. That's what they tell us. What they mean is they will survive. We surrendered in November, at a time when we were perched on the edge of victory. Betrayed by the cowards and the traitors within our ranks. How do we fight them? We unite! We must join together for a greater Germany! We will hang the profiteers! Crush the communists! We will disinfect our country of the Jewish vermin! Sacrifice. We will struggle, yes. But only then will we triumph. And we will triumph.
1914 was the year in which World War I broke out. Within 2 years, Germany had won that war. Not alone won it nominally, but won it actually. The German submarines, which were a surprise to the world, had swept all the convoys from the Atlantic Ocean, and Great Britain stood there without ammunition for her soldiers. At that time, the French army had mutinied. They lost 600,000 of the flower of the French youth on the Somme. The Russian army was defecting. They didn't like the Tsar. And the Italian army had collapsed. Not a shot had been fired on the German soil. Not an enemy soldier had crossed the border into Germany. And yet, here was Germany offering England peace terms. Well, England in the summer of 1916 was considering that seriously. They had no choice. While that was going on, the Zionists in Germany, who represented the Zionists from Eastern Europe, and they said, we will guarantee to bring the United States into the war as your ally, to fight with you on your side, if you will promise us Palestine after you win the war. The price you must pay us is Palestine after you have won the war and defeated Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey. They made that promise in October of 1916, and that was called the Balfour Declaration. The Balfour Declaration was merely Great Britain's promise to pay the Zionists what they had agreed upon as a consideration for getting the United States into the war. That is where all the trouble started.
The Balfour Declaration was a letter written by British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour to Lionel Walter Rothschild, in which he expressed the British government's support for a Jewish homeland in Palestine. The long-term effects of the Balfour Declaration and the British government's involvement in Palestinian affairs are felt even today. And this is how the State of Israel was created on May 14, 1948, through political promises and the war-torn region of Europe.
Above all, we must remove the Jews. They run our banks, they lost us the war, they alone are responsible for the economic disaster in Europe. are responsible for the moral decadence that now riddles our society. The Jews! The Jews! Yes! Who call themselves German, but who are now, and who have always been, unwelcome, unwanted, and they are everywhere!
When you ask what have the Germans done to the Jews, you must always ask what have done the Jews to the Germans. Since 1850, they have done three things which are really dramatic. Number one, they were a small minority of 2% of the population. At the time when Hitler came to power, 500,000 within 60 million German people. This small minority managed to control about 50% of the media, about 70% of all judges, to have a tremendous influence in movie and in theater and in literature. They were overrepresented. This is one thing. They were absolutely overrepresented, as today in England, in France, and in the United States. Second, Jews were at the origin of a lot of catastrophic financial bank crashes in Germany between 1870 and 1920. This is all documented. I mean, it's not Nazi propaganda or anti-Semitic or Arab propaganda. It's a lot of books have been published, even by Jewish savings, because of these Jewish gangsters, bank gangsters and speculation people. Then the third point, which was psychologically the most dangerous of all, they have introduced into German art and culture and theater and movie decadence, immorality. The first homosexual theaters, plays, were made in Berlin in the 1920s. The first adultery theater plays were made in the 1880s and 1890s, 100 years ago, by Jewish authors. Adultery, then sexual perversions of all sorts, sadism, masochism, a lot of homosexuality.
Ella Hughley wrote a book about a controversial subject that is only whispered about from time to time by scholars, archaeologists, and theologians. She shows that the original Hebrews who were freed from Egyptian bondage were a black-skinned people. But it doesn't stop there. She provides more information that shows the African Americans are descendants of those original Hebrews. This book brings out the fact that the Bible says ancient Israel looked like the Ethiopian and ancient Egyptians. Ella Hughley shows this by the biblical comparison of Moses and Joseph to the ancient Egyptians. She shows how the punishments, the curses that were put on Israel by the Most High, fit the full description of the African Americans' history and social ills in the Western Hemisphere. Ella Hughley goes deeper. She provides information about the Ashkenazi Jews and who they are really descendants from. Now, check this out. This is from a site called JewFact.org, Judaism 101. Ashkenazi Jews are the Jews of France, Germany, and Eastern Europe and their descendants. The adjective Ashkenazic and corresponding nouns Ashkenazi, singular, and Ashkenazim, plural, are derived from the Hebrew word Ashkenaz, which is used to refer to Germany. Most American Jews today are Ashkenazim, descended from Jews who immigrated from Germany and Eastern Europe from the mid-1800s to the early 1900s. The pages in this site are written from the Ashkenazic Jewish perspective.
What to do? What are the anthropologists and archaeologists going to do in dealing with this information? And that is what I believe, what sponsored, maybe consciously in some cases, unconsciously in other cases, what we could call the cover-up. Williams wrote a book called The Destruction of Black Civilization. And in this book he outlined 7 points as to why he feels that there was a cover-up.
Ignore. Just refuse to publish any facts of African history that don't go along with our racial theories.
We need to create a religious and a scientific doctrine so that African slavery won't appear that bad after all.
What we need to do is flood the world with new African histories that contain our European perspectives only.
Start renaming people and places. Replace African names with Arabic and European names. This will disguise their true black identity.
Let's change the criteria for defining race. For example, 1 drop of Negro blood in America makes you a Negro, no matter how light the skin.
Yes, and when reporting ancient African history, reverse the standard. No matter how dark the skin, woolly the hair, or thick the lips, you don't have to be a Negro.
When black contribution to civilization is too obvious, let's find a way to attribute it to outside white influences.
When all the ancient historians contradict your theory, we'll just discredit them.
Chancellor Williams was a scholar, and we feel that his observations have a lot of merit to them. But there are his personal observations. Talk about the rewriting of history. We have to set that in the context that we're talking about during the 1800s is when this started.
This is H.S. Yaakov, his bondservant and watchman. Shalom wa barawak ak wa akwaf. Always to the esteem of the Most High, Elohim Yah.